This is second lecture of mixing. In this lecture, we will discuss about differences between solid and liquid mixing and mechanism of solid mixing. I, Dr. S. P. Singh, Director, BSS College of Pharmacy, will continue this lecture. At first, before going to differences between solid and liquid mixing, we first know what are the different types of mixing. Basically, broadly if we will see that, then there are three types of mixing: liquid mixing, or it is called as fluid mixing. Liquid mixing means mixing between liquid and liquid, mixing between liquid and gases. Fluid mixing means fluid comes both liquid as well as gases. So, these type of mixings. Next is powder mixing or solid mixing, that means mixing of two different types of powders or any solid particles which is to be mixed together. Then semi solid mixing, third is criteria is the semi solid mixing. So, these are the three broad types of mixing: liquid mixing, fluid mixing, powder mixing or solid mixing, this is second type, and semi solid mixing, this is the third type. So, first type, that is fluid or liquid mixing. In this mixing process, if we will check that for some fluids mixing is very easy, but it differs or it is produces more difficulty in some types of fluids, some different types of fluids. So, in some cases it is easy, in some cases it is difficult. So, in which cases it is easy and in other cases, in which cases it is difficult, it depends upon the factors. What are they? Flow characteristics, mixing mechanism and mixing equipment. So, flow characteristics, that means what is the type of flow of fluids which we are going to mix together. If it is free flowing or its viscosity is high, so it is not free flowing. Mechanism of mixing, which mechanism is followed during fluid mixing or liquid mixing, and the equipment which is used for mixing. Basing on these, it depends that mixing is how the mixing process takes place. It is easier or it is difficult process. Second type is powder or solid mixing. Powder mixing, it is an operation or it is a process in which two or more than two solid substances are mixed together in particulate form, intermingled in mixture by continuous movement of particles. It means simply when two or more than two different types of solid substances are taken and mixed or intermingle them in the mixture with continuous movement of particles, then the process leads to powder or solid mixing. It is an example of neutral mixture and most common operation employed during preparation of different formulations like powders, tablets and capsules. In case of tablets, if we will see that there are one is drug, and along with that drug different types of excipients are used like granulating fluid, granulating agent, then binders, diluent like disintegrating agent, Likewise, we are using different types of excipients in the preparation of tablets, in the preparation of granules, which leads to further after compression it is converted into tablets. So, in those cases this type of mixing takes place or neutral mixing takes place. Difference between solid and liquid mixing. In solid mixing, what happens? Two or more substances are intermingled by continuous movement of particles. As it has been explained in previous slide, in case of solid mixing, what we are taking? We are mixing two or more substances, two or different solid powders or substances are taken together and mixed together by the movement of particles in the mixture. Whereas, in case of liquid mixing, this is achieved by mixing elements of suitable shape to act as an impeller to produce appropriate flow pattern in mixing vessel. That means, liquids are taken into the vessel and their impellers are used in such a way that it follows a fixed flow pattern, which leads to proper mixing of the liquids or both the liquids into it. Some other differences are there. In case of solid mixing, this process is used for mixing of dry powders. So, solid mixing is used for mixing of dry powders. Liquid mixing, it is used in preparation of emulsion, suspension and mixtures. These three type of products can be prepared with the help of liquid mixing, that is emulsion, two immiscible liquids are used, suspension, solid and liquids are mixed together, and similarly mixtures. In this case, large sample size is required for proper mixing. In liquid mixing, a small sample size is sufficient for proper mixing of liquid substances. High power required for mixing. Liquid mixing, less power required for mixing process. That means, less energy is required in case of liquid mixing, whereas as compared to solid mixing. So, these are some differences between liquid mixing as well as in solid mixing. Mechanism of solid mixing. In general, what happens? Mixing for solid mixings, three different processes are involved: convective mixing, shear mixing, and the third one is diffusive mixing. These three different types of mixing process takes place or mechanism takes place in case of solid mixing. First one is convective mixing or macro mixing. So, this is also convective mixing is also called as macro mixing. What happens? In this case, it is also called as bulk transport. So, here mixing takes place by transferring the part of material from one location to another location of the system by means of blades or paddles of the equipment. That means, from one location to another location, the powders transport of powders takes place, or materials are transferring from one place to another place. How? Suppose this is a blade. With the help of this blade, this powder is transferring from here to here. Again it is from here, it is transferring to this place. So, in this way, by using blades or paddles of the equipment, if transferring of material takes place from one location to another location of the system, then this process is called as convective mixing or macro mixing. It is also called as bulk transport. See here the particle groups, means different particle groups are there, and this is the mixed produced. So, you see this portion is moving in this direction, this is moving in this direction. That means, transferring of particles from one place to another place takes place. So, these leads to the, if this type of mechanism is followed in case of mixing, then this mechanism is called as convective mixing or macro mixing. It is also called as bulk transport, because transport of material is taking place from one place to another location of the system, and the equipment used for transporting of material is blades or paddles of the equipments which is used for mixing process. Second mechanism of solid mixing is shear mixing. In this type of mixing occurs when a layer of material flows over another layer, resulting in the layers moving at different speeds, and therefore, mixing at layer interface. See what happens. This is a layer of component, this is another layer, this is another layer, and this is another layer. So, in this mixing what happens? The particle slips over one another or slides. So, this type of mixing is called as shear mixing. That means, in these cases layer of material flows over another layer, one layer flows over another layer. So, you see there are 4 different layers. So, one layer is moving over another layer. So, if this type of mixing takes place at different speeds, then it is called as shear mixing, or the mechanism is called as shear mixing. Shear mixing occurs when removal of mass by convective mixing creates an unstable shear or slip plane, which leads or causes the powder bed to collapse. That means, in case of convective mixing, the mass is transferred from one place to another place. So, in this process, that is removal of mass by convective mixing, due to this it creates an unstable shear or plane. Let us suppose a pile of powder is there. Okay. So, due to convective mixing, this is a blade. Due to convective mixing, what happens? This blade scraps this material, takes this material to another place. That means, removing the mass of this pile of powder, and it is taking to another place. Due to this, a blank space is created at this position, which leads to breaking down of this pile of powders, or due to this it collapses. So, since this breaking down or collapsing takes place, in these cases this slip of layer. Why this is breaking? Due to this slipping of layers. This process is called as shear mixing. Second, the action of mixture induces velocity gradient within the powder bed. If there is a difference in velocity of different layers of powders also, this also leads to shear mixing. So, I think now it is clear that what is shear mixing and what is convective mixing. So, in case of convective mixing, powder is transferring from one place to another place with the help of blades or scrapers. In case of shear mixing, it is powder is components are sliding over different layers with different speeds. So, this type of mixing leads to shear mixing. Third mechanism is diffusive mixing. Diffusive mechanism occurs by random movement of particles within a powder bed, and it causes them to change their relative position in relation to one another. This type of mixing is also known as micro mixing. What happens? See, as it is shown in the diagram, here is the mix and random path of particles. You see, the particles are moving randomly, haphazardly in this mixture. So, as this, you see, one particle is moving in this direction, one is in this direction, one is here, another one is in here, again this is moving in this direction, this is moving in the direction, from here it is moving to this place, like that. So, random movement of particles takes place, or the movement of particles follows a random path. So, due to this random movement of particles within the powder bed leads to change in their relative position in relation to one another. Suppose that this, after random movement, reaches to this position. Similarly, this particle, after movement, it reaches to this position. This particle reaches to this position. Like that, there is a haphazard movement of particles, which leads to change in their relative position with in relation to one another. So, this mechanism of movement or movement of particles, that is called as diffusive mechanism. Okay. So, what are the different mechanisms involved in case of solid mixing? So, from this we can conclude that there are three different mechanisms that are involving in case of solid mixing. One is convective mixing, shear mixing, and third one is diffusive mixing. So, as you know that in case of convective mixing, differences between convective, shear and diffusive mixing. Okay. Convective mixing, with the help of blades or scrapers, particle is moving from one place to another place. In case of shear mixing, particles are sliding over each other, or we can say that layers of particles are sliding. Over each other. In case of diffusive mixing, random movement of particle takes place. So, depending upon the movement of particles, movement of substances, these all the three different types of mechanisms can be differentiated in case of solid mixing. Convective mixing, it is called as macro mixing or bulk transport. Diffusive mixing, it is called as micro mixing. Now, diffusive mixing, when powder bed is forced to move, it dilates. That means, the volume occupied by the bed will increases due to this random movement. So, this occurs because the powdered particles become less tightly packed. Due to this, there is an increase in air spaces or voids between them. Since the particles are moving randomly in case of diffusive mixing, so this leads to since the powders are less tightly packed, so there is an air spaces or voids between the particles, or due to this there is an increase in air spaces or voids between the particles. So, there is a potential for the powdered particles to pass through this void spaces under gravitational forces, as in case of tumbling mixture or by forced movement in fluidized bed. So, in this type of mixing is known as diffusive mixing. In fluidized bed or in tumbler mixture, diffusive mechanism is followed. These are the basics of different mechanisms of solid mixing and differences between solid mixing and liquid mixing. Thank you.